Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting for Monday, July 2nd. We have a big agenda, so even though we're waiting for a couple of colleagues, and I'm sure they'll arrive shortly, I'm going to go ahead and convene the meeting since we do have a quorum. Let's start with item 1. Roll call, please.
Commissioners Ajemian?
Present.
Chan? Dentler?
Yes, present.
Yao?
Present.
President Armenian? Item 2A, approval of the June 14, 2012 meeting minutes.
Since we do have two commissioners absent, I'm thinking perhaps they might have corrections and it might be appropriate to continue this item till later in the meeting. Is that with everyone's approval? Do we have any word on the other commissioners?
Ms. Dentler, Mr. President Armenian expected about a 410 ETA, so we should. I have not heard from Ms. Chan.
Commissioner Chan. Okay. Thank you so much. Then we'll move forward with item 3, our first report, 3A, customer services update.
Good afternoon, members of Commission. Tammy Valier, Customer Services Administrator. Today I'm going to be reporting on customer service activities for the first 3 quarters. I want to share with you some of the ways that we are using the smart meters to help our customers. Even though we're not billing through the system and we don't have all the customer interfaces in place, we are realizing many benefits. 88% of our move-in and move-out orders completed remotely. Over 18,000 of on-demand reads were submitted and retrieved. We use those while we're speaking to customers to resolve high bill complaints. Sometimes we need them for meter access where we can't get a physical read. Other times for verification prior to sending a bill if it hits our exceptions for high-low usage. And sometimes customers are just checking to see if something they've done has now lowered their own bills. So they'll, like if they fixed a leak, they might want to call and see what the read is and what the usage is, and then we can verify it for them right there on the phone. Over 12,000 service orders completed electronically, which equates to 12,000 avoided truck rolls. And this is a conservative number. The on-demand reads previously used to result in the field technicians having to go out and do some of this verification in the field. That was about 4,600 per year. So in actuality, we've probably reduced our truck rolls by 16,000, 17,000. On the customer side, extended hours for same-day reconnection. Of course, we have the same business hours, but a customer could come into the office at 4:59 and pay their bill, and most likely we can get their service turned back on. 99.4% of new service turn-ons and reconnects completed the same day. Quick dispute resolution because we have the data right at our fingertips. Leak detection and knowledge of usage alone is saving customers money, and I have a few examples of that. The first example I'd like to show you is an account that hit our billing exceptions for high usage. At first glance, you can see that there appears to be a leak. There's continuous high flow for many hours. We would then go and drop down and look at the hourly data. And you can see that her usage never falls below 25 cubic feet per hour, which would be the size of the leak that she has, which is relatively large. During the time, at no time does the usage actually drop to 0. That is an indication of a leak. In this situation, we attempted to contact the customer. We had field tech go out there, walk the property. There were no visible signs of a leak. She ended up having to call a plumber, and you can see where the plumber came out. He turned off the service. We were able to look at the data and see that there were periodic times where the meter did drop to 0, and the leak was repaired. Now, as we move forward with the system, we'd like to be more proactive where we have some type of trigger that shows us meters that are using water for 24 to 48 hour periods where we can contact the customer in advance or send them a letter and let them know that they have a leak or they potentially have a leak, and then they could repair it before they get the high bill. So far, it's manually done, and we've worked about 101 leak service orders. Of those, 71 customers were notified with a door hanger. Another 30, we actually were able to get customer contact. And those leaks equivalent to 5,000 gallons per hour that was lost. The next example is a customer who contacted us regarding his increased electric usage. You can see that this customer has several peaks where the circles are dotted. After discussing this with him, we told him the days and the hours, and he immediately knew that it was some type of equipment he has in his home that he uses regularly, so he wasn't concerned about those peaks. But what is circled lower in the chart are some areas of prolonged high usage that we needed to take a closer look at for him. We first looked at his typical usage and discussed the hours of the day that his usage peaks. And you can see the peaks and valleys. He was able to determine that that's his pool filter. So he has it scheduled where it comes on from 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m., and it comes on again in the evening from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. So all of this was regular usage that he expected. Next, we looked at the first day of prolonged usage, which was about 11 hours of continuous high usage, and the second day, which was very similar to the first day. And then comparing his typical usage to these 2 days, the customer was able to determine that his pool pump came on as he expected. It stayed on for the 2 hours, went off for a short period of time, went back on, and continued on. On both of these days, his pool service man was there cleaning, and he figured that he must have put the chemicals in his pool, turned the filter back on, and left without turning the filter off. So his pool pump was running the entire day until a second cycle went on and then was turned off. So those are just 2 examples, but we have many similar situations where customers are knowing about the usage and they're able to make their own repairs. Typically, it has been high water usage where they think they have their sprinklers set to Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. We show them the information and they identify that somebody's reprogrammed their sprinkler and they're going on every day. Their customers can now go online and look at their electric usage on the front page of our website at glendalewaterandpower.com. They could sign on to OPower and they could see their daily, weekly, and monthly usage. Before I move on, do you have any questions about this? I have my regular report following.
I just have a quick question on the notice of the water leak example you gave, Ms. Raya. Did you say that the customer can only be notified by a mail or a door hanger?
Well, right now, the process is very manual, so we'll look at the usage to first confirm in the office that we highly suspect that it's a leak. We'll try and contact them by phone, but it's rare that we can actually reach them by phone, so we go out to the property. We'll see if we can identify a leak in the front area or any of the access places that we have. And they'll leave a door hanger on the door with our phone number, the size of the leak that they've detected.
Could you clarify what is the criteria for isolating the leak or identifying that there is a leak? What is the differential of the usage, or what kind of criteria are you looking at?
It's not really the usage. It's that the meter has been registering flow throughout the 24-hour period. Primarily, you might look at some hours in the evening where usually there's at least 1 or 2 hours where there should be no water usage. If there's always flow, then it's highly possible that that customer has a leak.
Do you classify that flow as a certain cubic foot in order to qualify as a leak?
Well, the information we get is cubic feet per hour. I had one, for example, on my property that was 0.1 cubic feet per hour. There was no way I was going to ever find that. There's lots of those, but we look at them, and obviously the largest ones we try and look at first and address those.
I was trying to identify what is that cubic foot flow that the customer will be made aware of, and then secondly, can they be made aware of through electronic means like email, besides a telephone call, like text message or something like that? Is that possible?
Sure, that would be possible if we were set up for that, yes.
Okay, so currently that's not the option.
Currently, it's not. Currently, like I said, it's manual. In the future, they'll be able to go on and see it themselves, but I don't really have a great answer for that. I don't know some of the new features that we have with our, I don't know if possibly our outage management system might have a text messaging feature on there that we could use as well.
But for me personally, I mean, if I understand what kind of a leak would create me a concern for me, I mean, 0.1 cubic foot might not be, for example, but maybe it's up to 1 cubic foot per hour. I might be saying, hey, I'm wasting a lot of money, but I want to be notified by an email if that's possible in the future, so that can be identified sooner, so I can take advantage of maybe having it fixed right away, or not wait for somebody to call, which I might miss because I might not be home. Can that be done in the future or be looked at?
It can absolutely be looked at. Like I said, we don't have the means to do that right now, but we are looking at large leaks. And as we work through all of those, I anticipate that even the very small leaks, once we get the mass leaks out of our system, that we'll address everything.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we'll wait until everything is rolled out, and then we can maybe help every customer identify even the smallest leak.
Right now, do we have a information window or place on our customer account enrollment database for people to enter their email so that someday we could move towards an email notification system? Right now, do we ask customers if they would like to provide an email address?
We have customers provide their email address when they sign on to eCare, but they're not giving us permission at that time to use it on our end. And I know we discussed this recently in our privacy policy. Maybe you can expand on that.
Yes, we could certainly contact customers via email. We'd want to make sure we have their permission because there are people that love emails, there are people that hate getting emails, so it'd just be a question of getting their permission up front, and then we could absolutely do what Commissioner Yao is describing.
I think that would be a labor cost saver also, potentially, compared to door hangers and dialing phone numbers and leaving voicemails and waiting for the response and all that. So, good thing to move towards.
Just a quick suggestion. I think as we move on with the smart grid system and start installing the home display systems, that would be a great time to get customers' email addresses and also have them sign off of a waiver for privacy policy and, basically signing off on the fact that they're okay with receiving notifications about leaks and such. It'll be a great, easy thing to do as they're signing, if somebody's already in their house, putting a display in, they can explain them why they're getting their email. And I'm assuming, most customers these days, would enjoy that type of a notification.
Yes, so far we've had really good response from the customers that have been notified, and the frame is an excellent suggestion as we can send messages to it.
One more question. How many unique visitors or unique signups do we have on OPower? How many people are using it?
I don't know. Craig might know. How many people we have signed up on OPower?
Ask them.
Greg Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. I think there's less than 1,000 on the website right now, but we just went live with the hourly data, and we're going to have a press release and a rollout in our source here in the next couple weeks. So will track how many people actually migrate to that. We do have a number of other smart grid programs that just got approved by City Council that will build on what you're talking about, getting emails and using smartphones and getting people to sign up for programs that way.
Thank you.
Any more questions before she goes on?
I do. I have a question. I apologize for entering a little late. The example you gave on water leak, so I understand the system will kick these out. Is this an exception report that you get every day? First of all, that's my first question. And then secondly, are we able to resolve all of these issues as they come up, or do we have like a serious backlog?
We have a serious backlog.
Okay.
The system actually that we get them from is pretty clunky, so we are working with IT to have a SQL report that gets reported to us on a daily basis. We're also building within the system according to routes and cycles so that we can contact customers, before they get a bill and then have another look right after they get the bill, so they're not, going too long having a leak before we actually identify it. But right now, there is a huge backlog, and it takes a lot of time to actually get the system to bring up what you need and then go through them, because just because there's flow for 24 hours doesn't mean that they actually have a leak. It could be an apartment building. That could be maybe a golf course. There's a lot of other things that you have to look at. We can't just, and we have to be a little bit careful about just how we word sending out a letter saying you have a leak or we have identified a leak. It may not be a leak at all.
So now with the serious backlog, is there a plan?
Yes, we're working with IT right now to get information that's easier for us to address. We also, as far as our resources, we're still in the implementational phase. We still have some meters that we're installing that are the really difficult ones to get to. We have the opt-out customers that we're working with. So, we're really busy, and at the moment, the leaks are filler work for us. Unless we see a really huge one, we'll have to get out there as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think it's great that the system will allow us to detect the leaks, and, being that it's such a precious resource, I hate to see, to have the whole team here see that we just can't get to it because of the serious backlog, and meanwhile, we're just wasting a lot of water.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Are there other questions before she goes on to the other report? So I'll now turn the rest of today's agenda over to President Armenian, and we're going to return to approval of the minutes, but first we're going to continue on 3A for the second half.
Okay. This is my regular report to you. We project that we will answer 122,000 phone calls this year. 78% of these calls were handled within 30 seconds, but that is an average. Our goal is 80%, so we're slightly below. There are peak times where a customer can be waiting as long as 23 minutes or a half an hour. So again, the 78% under 30 seconds is just an average. Our calls are taking longer because we do have the data that we want to spend time with on the customers. So where we used to have a traditional 3-minute talk time, we're kind of getting away from that because we don't want customer service reps to rush off the phones. We want them to work with them and really work towards a first call resolution, which we can do most of the time now with the data that's available to us. Our abandon rate is 4%, which is above our goal of 3%. Some of these calls were lost during peak times, but the majority of them for this year was lost during the windstorms. Our front counter service is slightly reduced from last year. Many of the customers that use the front counter come in for PVC program information, or they want help applying for the programs. I think the reduction may be due to saturation of those programs, so I think we might see an increase as we roll out some of the new ones that Craig just mentioned. Our uncollectibles remain low at 0.12%. That's for electric, water, rubbish, sewer, hazardous waste. If you were to just pull out electric and water, it's even lower at 0.1%. This is the breakdown of customers that left us with unpaid bills. The average 92% of accounts uncollected are from residential customers. That represents 70% of the revenue written off. And in fact, for the last 3 years, that has been consistent, a 70-30 split between residential and commercial. So we're not seeing much change there. There's no significant change in the number of payment arrangements granted. We project approximately 24,000 payment extensions. The ratio between commercial and residential also remains consistent at 92 for residential and 8% for commercial. And the number of reminder notices has slightly increased, but the percentage of notices to bills remains the same. In fact, there's little change in the percentage of bills, reminders, final notices, and disconnects for the past 4 years. I think you may recall in 08, 09, we saw drastic changes in our statistics, and since then, they've pretty much leveled out. So I think this is our norm. And that's it, if you have any questions.
I have a couple of questions. First question, your write-off, the write-off chart.
Yes.
Is this a cumulative, or cumulative, the numbers?
Yes.
Okay. The green line, I don't understand if it's cumulative. How come April is lower than March?
I'd have to look at it, but it may have been a payment on a write-off account.
Okay. Okay, that's good.
We do recover. It could have been a bankruptcy that we ended up recovering money for.
Okay. That's a good explanation. The next question I have, on the next chart, monthly write-off number of customers. Residential for October spiked at 114. Do you know why?
Yes, that is one large landlord, residential landlord, that filed bankruptcy.
Filed bankruptcy? Okay. Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
But just as a follow-up to that question, I thought if the landlord files for bankruptcy, individual tenants can still have the meter on and still supply electricity to them, right?
Yes, if they sign up for service, they can. But in this case, it was a bankruptcy, so the owner was allowed to sign up for service again under a DIP account.
Is that a master meter
Yes.
scenario? Okay. So if you can explain the situation, if it's a master meter, if the landlord files bankruptcy, does the tenant have the right to turn it back on right away, immediately, by calling in?
Well, usually, in this particular case, it was never off. It was going to be turned off, and she produced her bankruptcy papers. So the service was never disconnected. We had to close that account as a bankruptcy account, open a DIP account under her name. The bankruptcy account becomes closed and ends up in write-off.
So, I mean, just from my perspective, it looks like that classification wouldn't be 114 tenants that were written off. It was the one commercial building, or in this case, a residential building. So is that a correct classification then, to say that 114 units were written off?
Those aren't units. That would be the one customer I'm talking about, and then 113 other residential customers.
Oh, okay.
Where in the city
Okay.
that
Right.
who left us with an unpaid
Okay.
bill.
So-
But the majority, as far as the revenue, is the one customer.
Okay, so one major customer.
Yes.
Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought it was 114.
Sorry.
So in that case, in terms of a master meter, and then you turn it, well, in this case, you had left it on, but there was bankruptcy with the specific account owner, and then there are tenants. So everything prior to the bankruptcy is the liability, or it is worked out in the bankruptcy process and potentially written off.
Correct.
Everything moving forward, how do you bill that if it's, you just split the bill amongst the remaining tenants?
Yes, the original account becomes the bankruptcy file, and then the next one is signed up under the same owner and is billed to the same owner. And they're responsible for paying only the new account,
They being who?
the landlord.
Even though they're bankrupt already? So how do they get a new account if they're already bankrupt?
The court tells us to. In fact, they can file a second bankruptcy.
But what assurance does GWP have that the person who declared bankruptcy is going to pay future bills?
If the court allows us, we'll get a deposit. But the court does not always allow that.
And so GWP essentially carries the risk moving forward?
Yes.
There's no way to actually put that risk on the actual consumers of the service?
I don't believe so. Bankruptcies have been a very difficult situation for us. Like I said, we could have multiple bankruptcies at one location, this one being in one of those circumstances.
So I guess maybe if the city attorney can clarify that, because it seems to me odd that we would take on that risk if someone is already defaulted on their payments. Why would we extend that credit? we don't do that for any other person, right? We check credit when we open up a new account. And if they don't qualify for that credit, then they don't get to open up an account. So why would we do this knowing the risk on this in this instance?
Unfortunately, we don't have much choice. That's the way the federal bankruptcy laws work. It's, I believe, Section 366 of the Federal Bankruptcy Code that requires us to continue to provide service. So as Tammy was saying, we'd open a debtor in possession account so we could track the pre-bankruptcy and post-bankruptcy service. To the extent we can get a deposit, we get one, but we can't always ask for one because of the federal law.
But is that, I mean, having a DIP status doesn't change the risk profile in any way. In fact, it's worse, right?
Right. But regrettably, under most scenarios, that risk falls upon us as the utility company.
So there's no way to say that those who are consuming the service now have responsibility for their consumption? Because in this case, it's tenants, right, who are essentially the majority of the usage is coming from tenants.
Correct.
Who are at no fault in this situation other than having to be tenants in a bankrupt property. But at the same time, that they are the ones using a large portion of the service, I think that there would be some way to...
There's no way, unfortunately, that we can force them to take service in that manner where the tenants become our account holders. So if the landlord wishes to continue being the account holder, they can continue to do so. It's just that it becomes a debtor in possession account.
And so do we have any means of protecting ourselves as a provider?
Well, if we feel that there's a tremendous risk, we can make a case to the court that we need a higher amount of deposit or, something more that maybe we already have on file. But the law is very protective of the bankrupt entity, unfortunately, in these circumstances. So it is a risk that largely falls on us. That's how it is.
One of the things that you may be leading to is that we would have done differently is if we were able to disconnect the master meter and she had not produced the bankruptcy paperwork. Once the account's disconnected, it won't be reconnected without full payment. But the tenants at that point, our code allows them to then, one person or a group of them can sign up and take responsibility for the account. But in this situation, it's never gone to disconnect.
Doesn't make sense to me. I wish there was some way we could kind of create some legal protection for liability because, we wouldn't do this for any other individual defaults on a payment. So we're essentially making an exception for someone who happens to be hiding behind bankruptcy law. Thank you. We do have one speaker, Herbert Milano.
Thank you, President Armenian, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission, and staff. My name is Herbert Milano. I'd first like to commend the Glendale Water and Power and the Ms. Valier staff and herself for the report that I'm now getting in order to try to put my arms around the problem of the water usage at an apartment building. I've been trying for the past 3 years or so to get some semblance of control when we only have one master meter. But the latest report that I got, it was incredibly nicely structured. It allows me to basically get a sense of where it's taking place. So now I know that there is a problem with leakage. Not significant enough to cause any major differential in cost, but one that should be addressed. But now it becomes evident because there's water usage 24 hours a day, including at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I find these reports incredibly valuable and gives me an idea as to how to approach it systematically. What I would like to make a suggestion is with regard to the reports that you get as far as customer service is concerned, that I think would be advantageous to you in helping to take this topic a little bit further. When they give you residential information, you don't get the information by whether it's single-family ownership or residential multifamily. And in most buildings, the multifamily costs are primarily electric. For the others are obviously water and electricity. The bills generally should, I believe, would tend to be smaller for the multifamily person. That I think that segmenting this report such that you can separate it in those two measures, also by zip code, so that you can identify where the problems have been. I once again appeal to you, especially now that the electricity rates are going to be reconsidered, for the report that I've been asking for the past 3 years, the report that I refuse to pay, is a report that tells us the number of notices of disconnection by zip code. And this is so that any one event during the year would be accounted for. This would tell us the ability of residents with a particular demographic area or economic area to afford the electricity rates. This, I think, is absolutely crucial for any discussion on electricity rate increases. For the Glendale Water and Power and for the city and everyone, this is the conversation that's missing. We talk continually about the needs of the employee associations and the pension system and CalPERS needs and the transfer and how much is needed. But part of the conversation is that this is a holistic environment. Whatever happens in one part of the system affects the other. You do these rate increases, it's going to affect the many residents hard. And I would love to see a report that will be prepared and presented for proper evaluation, and I think it's to your purview to do that. And I'm asking that you take your mandate to support the public in this regard. On a couple of other comments, as a landlord, I just wanted to just make this comment to Mr. Armenian that whenever I have a tenant or an applicant that comes to me with a filed bankruptcy, that to me is an excellent potential credit risk because he's got no credit problems to contend with. And now it's much easier for me to look at roughly his 1/3 of his income that should be addressed towards the residential portion of his personal income distribution. So whenever you have an apartment owner that defaults on his obligations, tells us a couple of things, that there is a lot of connectivity there with a lot of people that depend on that landlord to do his due diligence and fulfill his obligations and remain as a viable entity. But it also tells us that even landlords come into significant financial problems. And we get, no protections other than, in this case, bankruptcy protection. But overall, we are the ones who are bearing the risk. And we bore the risk significantly. When CalPERS returns only 1.5% on their investments, the gap between that and 7 3/4 is borne by us indirectly through the transfers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 2.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Let's go back to the minutes and approve those first, since we skipped over that.
Item 2A, approval of the June 14, 2012 meeting minutes.
Anyone with any questions? If not, I do have a question. Why don't I start it off, and others can chime in. I do note that under 5B, where we talked about the transfer Mr. Ochoa reported to us, it's noted in here that the amount of monies transferred from GWP should be lowered over the next 10 years or so. I don't recall hearing a time frame like that. Are you sure that 10 years was in there?
Look into the video and correct it if...
Okay. 'Cause I don't seem to recall an actual timetable that was
Mr.
given.
President, members of the commission, Mr. Ochoa is obviously here, but I think the sense was we are starting this fiscal year to begin that reduction, and we're going to continue that course and until we get to some number that's more desirable than the one we have now, but I don't recall if he said 10 years either.
Okay, so if we can just...
We'll look and verify it.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone?
Just to postpone it until we clarify that, or prove it, and it.
No, I mean, I don't have a problem as long as it's, that part's accurate. I just wanted to make sure, because I personally, does anyone else recall the 10 years? Here.
I watched a video. I think I did hear the 10. First year being like 250,000 less. Yeah, I remember that.
I'm fine passing it as long as it's reflected correctly.
Not 100% sure, but I thought I did.
Well, I'll move approval pending, move approval conditioned on staff checking against the tape and that portion being stricken if it's not borne out by the tape. Is that acceptable?
We have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 I was not here.
One abstention. 4 approvals, 1 abstention. Okay.
C, update, water I'm sorry, 3B, update Newark Wet Compliance Program, Ramona Bueg.
Good afternoon, President Armenian, members of the Commission. Ramona Bueg, Assistant General Manager for Electric Services. In your package is a one-page summary of how we're doing with our NERC wet compliance. And if you forget what the acronym means, NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and WEC is the Western Energy Coordinating Council. These are the regional entities that are responsible for monitoring our performance with respect to the mandatory reliability standards. And just a couple of reminders, if you recall, the reason why we are trying to stay on top of this is if there are any violation levied against the city, we could be liable up to $1 million per day per violation, depending on the severity. So we're trying to really stay on top of this. As far as the registration, there are 16 potential registrations as an entity that we have to register as. We are registered in 4 of those, the 4 being as a load-serving entity, a purchasing selling entity, resource planner, and a distribution provider. As far as the standards, there's a total of 116 standards that's applicable to the industry. 37 of those are applicable to GWP. But 30 of those 37, each of those standards has numerous requirements that we have to respond to, and they have to show evidence that we are in compliance. For this year, there are 11 new standards that NERC had created that we have to keep track of, make sure that we can comply and adjust our procedures and policies accordingly. At the same time, they also retired 13 different standards that we had to pull out in terms of our policies and procedure. We had to modify them to show those adjustments. As a result, we have 11 new policies and procedures that we created this year. Of those, there are 96 different requirements that were created that we had to self-certify to that we just completed today. But self-certification means that we have procedures in place, policies in place, and evidence to demonstrate that we are in full compliance. And by self-certifying, sometime in the near future, they will do what's called a spot check. It's not a normal audit, but they will give us a 60-day notice and say that we need you to demonstrate that you really are in compliance, and they will give us notification, and we have to complete the full submittal at that point. There's also what's called NERC Alerts. Every now and then, if there's something happening out in the industry or even in the world that may affect the security of the system, we will get what's called a NERC Alert. And we have 3 different actions that we need to take. We just acknowledge it because there's no action required, or we have to submit an action plan as to how we mitigate it, and then when it's closed, when we completed it, tell them that we have completed the required action in order to mitigate or prevent any of those activities from happening to us. The good news is last month we completed an audit by WEC. As an entity registered in these 4 areas, NERC will audit us once every 6 years. And they did a full audit May 22nd to May 24th. And luckily, or I shouldn't say luckily, through the hard work of staff, they did not have any findings. We went and passed with flying colors, and they really like and appreciate the fact that we're organized, our policies in place, and our evidence are completely thought out. So in addition to that, we have a staff that's busy. We have what's called the under-frequency load shedding program. This is the program that we have to institute in case there is reliability issues that affect the bulk electric system. it's how much load, we call it load shedding. It's really a forced outage. We have to demonstrate to them that we have that in place. And the purpose for doing that is to keep the system stable to prevent any prolonged outages in a wider area.
That's an unplanned outage.
That's an unplanned outage, but we are forced to implement, and we have to show them that we can automatically do that, and we also have authority for dispatchers to drop the load from basically management. Say, yeah, you're authorized to do that. You don't need to get permission to implement that. Every month, we have to submit what's called a steady state modeling and simulation for the transmission system. Basically, it represents the load. We have to demonstrate that we can support the load with the resources that we have. That's basically what that means. And the dynamic data for modeling and simulation is basically an engineering analysis that everything that we have in place will support the system connectivity. So overall, to summarize, I think we have a good program in place. We have our subject matter expert staff that are fully engaged. And currently, we are in the process of updating our internal compliance program, mainly due to the change of management, because we now have basically a new chair for our compliance team, which is Mr. Cern. That's it in summary. So if you have any questions, Ms. Godinez and I will be glad to answer those.
You're throwing her under the bus, too.
Her name is on the agenda, so.
Can you give us some examples of the new procedures that were written for GWP?
Yeah, the one that's a dynamic one or a moving target is the CIP, the infrastructure protection and the cybersecurity. That changes depending on what bugs or what threats they see out there. There's another one called the Aurora Alert that they send us to have to mitigate. Although we demonstrated that it doesn't affect us, we still have on a every 3-month basis, we have to report some sort of mitigation. Even though our mitigations, we don't have to do anything, we still have to comply with those. Until they take us off from that requirement, we need to continue reporting that. And if we don't report, we can get fined and levied a few $1,000s a day.
Okay. And so based on your experience and knowledge, you're confident that we will be able to comply with all 10 new procedures?
All 11. And we did. We did self-certify today, completed the analysis, in that we are either compliant or that none of those new requirements really apply to us.
Oh, okay.
So, like I said, of the 11 new standards, 96 new requirements were created.
They were created specifically for Glendale, right?
No.
Oh, no.
It's created specifically for the industry, and depending on the registration, some of those apply more than others.
I see. Okay, thank you.
I have a question on your load shedding program. Do you, as part of that, also do any sort of risk analysis on an annual basis to see what sort of scenarios might be out there, not just within the GWP system, but adjoining systems that could potentially cause a load shedding event?
That is correct. That is actually determined by what's happening outside the system, the load shedding program. But we've also done an analysis that we could drop all our load and it won't have an impact with the bulk electric system. So that analysis we also have to complete every time. Because we're mandated to demonstrate that if we drop any significant part of our load, that we won't impact our neighbors. So that's a part of the analysis we do annually.
But what about the other way around? If there are things happening in the system that we would then be ordered, or that would trip our system, do you kind of look at the external factors around the GWP system?
Yes, that's the availability of resources that's out there.
Any other questions?
Just curious about the last audit. How does this audit compare to the previous audit 6 years ago? And you mentioned that this audit we passed with flying color. What were some of the issues that we rectified to be prepared for this current audit?
Well, this is our first audit. These audits started 6 years ago, and we happen to be at the last end. So this is our first ever audit. That's where we're concerned. But in terms of mitigation, what we've done in the last 3 years is we've done what we call mock audits, internal audits. We hired an industry expert, and we started having them do a real audit and to see that, make sure that we have any holes. And if there are any holes that we can plug before the actual audit, we started doing that. So that helped us significantly.
So how strict is the internal audit schedule that we're going to try to be prepared for the next 6 years?
It's a lot stricter than the actual audit. What the instructions we give them is find any, be picky, nitpick everything, and let us decide whether or not those are something that, between us and legal, whether or not those are really violations or it's just their opinion. So after every audit, and that also includes our internal auditors. So every party that can help us assess the risk, legal and the auditors, plus our subject matter experts, take a look at it, make an assessment, either make a correction, mitigation, or if we have to self-report.
And how often does those internal audit occur? Is there a mandate internally with the city, or just up
No.
to you to make a call?
That's something that we put in our internal compliance program that we will try to do every year.
And I think Ramon is understating the successful results of this audit. I think it's pretty unheard of to have no findings in an audit, and the auditors were very, very impressed with GWP and indicated that they thought we were very well prepared and very professional. So I think Ramon and his team did an excellent job preparing and making sure that we've really got a culture of compliance, and that was really manifest in the audit results.
Great to hear. Thanks for identifying that.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for the report.
All right, thank you.
Next item.
Item 3C, update, Water Department, Peter Kavunas.
Good afternoon, President Armenian, members of the Commission. I'm Peter Kavunas, Assistant General Manager of Water. The Commission has been busy the last few months, to say the least, and one of the items that's kept you busy has been the water rate increase. And now that that's finished and behind us, wanted to take a chance or take the opportunity and refamiliarize you with the sources of water supply for the City of Glendale, our production for the year, and also the demand pattern for the last year. The last fiscal year is almost complete. We have almost all the months of worth of data. That information is presented to you on a monthly basis in your packet, and sometimes it's more useful to talk about information like that instead of just giving to you in writing. And that's my purpose this afternoon. As you'll see in that Table 1 on that report, through the month of May, we have produced a total of 26,000 acre-feet. Projecting typical production for the month of June of about 2,500 acre-feet. You can see our total will get to be close to about 28,500 acre-feet. Compare that with last year, which was 27,420, and the year before that, 28,410. The year before that, 31,588. You can see the trend had been to a lower production of water because of increasing conservation, reaching a bottom last fiscal year, and then a slight recovery this fiscal year. Actually, our projections when we put the budget together for fiscal 11-12 were that our sales would go up by approximately 5%. If you go up 5% from 27,420, you get to be about 28.8. We're anticipating 28.5, so pretty close to 5% jump year before. Table 2 breaks down the supplies a little bit more than just a total. Our supplies come from 3 sources. We have recycled water and groundwater. Those two together are called local production. And the demand that we can't meet from local production, we meet by purchasing water from Metropolitan Water District. So Table 2 shows you the local production in total, the MWD deliveries as a separate column, and then the total potable production, that's without the recycled water. And one of the highlights of this table is the 2 far right columns that show you the percentage of Metropolitan Water District water compared to local supply. We strive for 60-40. If we could do better, we would. But maxing out the local resources will get to about a 60-40. That's an improvement over the last few years. 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was closer to 70-30. And considering the local supplies are cheaper, going to 60-40 means we're controlling our cost of water production.
What's the primary attribution for that difference in local?
We're managing our local resources probably a little more carefully, a little closer eye to well production, and we've had a decrease this year, and we're, once again, because we're focused on it, we can see it right away and start focusing on what do we have to do to increase groundwater production. In addition to that, recycled water, which is not really under our control, it's what our recycled water customers choose to take. On occasion, we look at all the accounts very carefully, and if we see an account that's dropping off and not taking as much proportionally as it could be, we'll get on the phone and ask them in case they've had some procedure changes or for some reason they've forgot that they could take recycled water. So we just a little more closely minding the store. In our local production under Table 3, you can see the groundwater is split into the groundwater basins that is produced from. You have the San Fernando Basin production, Verdugo Basin production, and the two are totaled in the third column, labeled total groundwater production. The one item that stands out and I would bring to your attention is that first month of the fiscal year, July, from San Fernando Basin was particularly low, and that's a month when we had some work being done to the Glendale water treatment plant, the plant that produces polluted groundwater and treats it before we can deliver it to customers. So that month we lost a little bit of groundwater production. All in all, the San Fernando production has been okay. The Verdugo Basin production has been a little low, and as I mentioned, by watching closely what our wells are doing, we saw some decreased production from the wells, and so we focused our operators, our mechanics, and engineers into a single team to look at the wells and see what we need to do. One of the items that we'll be taking to council soon is a contract to have the well, the pump and motor pulled, the well rehabilitated, so we can increase production from the Verdugo Basin wells. Recycled water for the year is low. We've hit as high as 1,600 acre-feet for the year. If you can figure, June may be a little bit warmer. We may get up to 100 acre-feet of sales. We'll probably be a little bit low for the year. Again, not under our control. A cooler summer, cooler spring will do that. The production is further split to identify by source. In case of recycled, as shown in Table 6, a recycled water system in the city is delineated by projects, and you can see those summarized as the Power Plant Project, the Forest Lawn Project, and Verdugo Shoal Project, and the Glendale Recycled 3 that feeds Brand Park. Those are shown by month, and again, the total sales of recycled water could be higher, but that's a product of weather more than anything. What follows Table 6 is a series of graphs of the same data. Sometimes the data is easier to perceive in graphical form than numerical form. And what I'd like to do is draw your attention to the very last graph at the very end. And we're always mindful of the effect of conservation from the last 2 years and trying to understand whether we have real conservation adjusted for weather or have sales gone back up to pre-conservation levels. We've developed this chart, presented to the Commission, although not recently, and it has 3 separate charts within the same page. The first one is simply comparing the total water use compared to 2006. This is a calendar year comparison. We used calendar year 2006 as the base year before we got into mandatory conservation. You can see that for all the months shown in the year from May of 11 through May of 12, compared with the same months of 2006, demand has been the same or less. The 2 months that it was the same, it was March and April, and that was pretty much the low point. That tells me that most outdoor use has been pretty much stopped, and at that point it's mostly indoor use. I don't know that we're going to get much lower than those 2 months. But the rest of the months, on a year comparison, you can see that there still is conservation compared to 2006. To normalize it for weather, you can look at the next chart. George, if you can slide that up a little bit. Thank you. And what we did in this chart is we used the data for evapotranspiration in Glendale. There's a weather station in Glendale that measures temperature as well as evapotranspiration, and we compare that data with the same data for 2006. And we look at the change. And so if you look at the dark line is the 0%. So if the red line, which is showing evapotranspiration, is on the 0%, that means evapotranspiration for a month was the exact same as it was in 2006. When the red line is above that, that means we had higher evapotranspiration than 2006. And what's interesting is that the line showing water use, the blue line, is consistently below the 0 mark. It shows that we are consistently using less water than we did in 2006. And yet, if you look at evapotranspiration, it's either higher than it was in 2006, or if it's less, it's considerably less than the change in water. So it's showing you that you have conservation in Glendale that's real, even when you normalize for weather. And it's consistent throughout the months. Again, the only months that it kind of goes away is the month of February, March. But even still, March and April, you had months that were hotter and drier, and people still used the same amount of water as in 2006. The last chart shows you the same thing as for temperature, and you can see consistently tracking greater water savings than the difference in temperature, showing you again the conservation is real and has stayed with us, even in a year when we didn't put out any more messages than what we did, which was basically telling residents 3 days a week of watering your lawn works. Between those softer messages and the memory from the years past, we're still saving quite a bit of water. 15 to 20% is still real. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the previous years where we talk about additional wells to drill to produce more local production. How's that going, or is there a status report on that? Are we providing additional local water because of the wells that were drilled or not drilled?
We'll be happy to bring you a more detailed report. In summary, we completed one new well. We found an abandoned well, inspected it, rehabilitated it, and pressed it back in service. And that's helping keep our local production higher. That's the Foothill well. And we've drilled a new well in a property that was adjacent to the Rockhaven Sanatorium property. That well is completed. We will need some treatment for the water that it produces. The water has elevated levels of nitrates. And we will pick that up after we issue a bond and have some more money for capital projects. We expect that well will be placed in service and continue the trend of greater local production.
I recall previously that there is a maximum that we can produce locally. Can you refresh our memory on what that maximum is, or can we spend additional money on the well and produce more additional local water?
We can and we should. We have a limit in both groundwater basins that we have wells in. We have a limit in the San Fernando Basin. We have a limit in the Verdugo Basin. San Fernando Basin, we reach our limit of groundwater rights limit. In the Verdugo Basin, we're still short. Our maximum is 3,856 acre-feet a year that we can extract, and we don't get anywhere near that. We've gotten as high as 2,600 in the past, and our goal is to actually get to the full water right for the year. We believe we can get there. We think the new well at Rockhaven will be instrumental in getting us there, as well as rehabilitating the other wells that have dropped in production will be instrumental in getting us there.
Are those part of the next year's capital process to spend the money to work those wells?
They're a high priority on the capital budget, so it depends on how much capital money we have available. I would say they're number two, probably.
Oh, thank you.
I have a question. Your recycled water use table, I noticed the numbers are high for September, January, and February for most of the facilities. Can you explain why that happens?
No. We don't drive that at all. You may have an individual customer that just decides to switch off. It's actually, the question is, why were the numbers lower in the months that they're lower?
Oh, the other months.
Yeah. And it's up to the individual customer. Sometimes you may have a country club like Oakmont Country Club that feels particularly strongly about using only so much recycled water before they go back to potable to flush out the nutrients from their grass. The golf course is a landscaping business, and so they mind their greens very carefully. So what they choose to do, they do. If we see them dropping off, we'll call them and ask them, do you know that you've dropped off? And in one case in the past, this is about 4 years ago, we found that they had changed personnel. The new personnel wasn't aware that they could use recycled water. So they were very happy to hear that because they do get a discount. But they, customers come on and off as they need to.
So is it right to assume that the months where they went off, I mean, I'm seeing this like throughout here, at least maybe 9, 10 of the customers are showing the same trend. Is it fair to assume that maybe they just need less water during those months?
Yeah.
Much cooler months, or?
Yeah, it could be the weather dropped off. I'm not really sure.
Thanks.
I have some questions also about recycled water, but first let me back up to your, did I hear you correctly? You were going to take to City Council a request for the work, pump work that you want to have done on the Verdugo
Yes.
Basin well, and so I was wondering, that doesn't come to the commission so that we can assist by potentially making a recommendation on behalf of the...
We'll follow the standard process. This is just a purchasing procedure. We need a contractor to come on board and help pull the pumps and motors,
Right.
Video, rehabilitate the wells, and put everything back together again.
Oh, and that wasn't a criticism. I was just wondering procedurally about our role. We want to assist by making recommendations to council for capital expenditures, if that's of...
This would not be a capital expense. This is
I
an
see.
O&M expense. And I believe that all the council reports do come to the commission. They are sent to the commission, council. But it's an O&M. It's an O&M.
As an FYI, we don't actually put it on the agenda, however.
Right.
Okay. And so my remaining questions are about recycled water. Bear with me a few minutes while I just work my way through some of the tables. It's an area of interest to me, so I want to take a few minutes to help make sure I'm on top of this subject. So we can talk about it in future meetings. On Table 3, you have a reference to recycled water, and then it says in paren, Table 6L. But if I'm understanding correctly, when you flip over to Table 6L, that column only refers to Brandt Park?
Yeah, that should be 6M.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right.
Good catch.
Oh, I thought it was me. Good. Thank you. So on Table 6, I do have a few questions. And apologies for lacking some basic knowledge about our recycled water system, so I don't want to belabor it. I can fill in later by asking staff some quick questions behind the scenes. But to help the public understand as well as help the commission understand, where you have under Table 6, Column D, Other Users, can you help by just listing the top couple of users or other users?
Generically, of course.
Yeah, those would be maybe medians that are along the same project. There may be a small school property that's along the same project.
Okay.
And actually, as I'm hearing the interest from the commission, I'm just wondering if that wouldn't be a great topic for us to come back and give you. The next water department update could be on the recycled water system, including all the customers and so on, if you like, so you can get a lot more detail.
I'd like to learn more about it. But if I can just ask a couple more questions?
Sure.
When you say generically, is there some legal reason why we can't have the actual customers?
Yes, we cannot disclose the names and personal information about any of our customers.
Oh, I understand, of course. But we can list customers like Forest Lawn and Oakmont Country Club.
Yeah, I think those are generally known that they have recycled water service, so, those have been matters that they've disclosed publicly.
I
so,
see.
Yeah.
So we're protecting our customers' privacy. All right, thank you, I understand that. And then also about the Table 6, and perhaps this, you'll dive in if I'm asking a question that calls for disclosure of a confidential name, but generically speaking, other golf and tennis facilities and country clubs in the Glendale area, they could potentially become recycled water customers and they're choosing not to? Or is it my understanding correct that some of them can't because we don't have infrastructure to supply them?
Your understanding is correct.
Okay.
We built out the system in the early 90s, The system was built out to serve specific customers that were targeted. Those were the largest users, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, that made it worthwhile for the city to build this system. And along the way, picked up any other smaller ones that were nearby. At that time, the city also changed the municipal code and made it so that if anybody else wanted to add on, they had to pay their way to connect to the system. Enough years went by, and with a constraint in resources in California in general, the city adopted changes to that municipal code. And so now it's permissible for the utility to fund extensions to the recycled water system to a new customer. Although we have a shortage of funds, so we haven't really done that.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a little lost on this with all these amendments and changes to the code. Say I'm a golf course operator and I call up GWP and would like to engage in discussion of how to deliver recycled water to my facility.
The answer is, if the line's running right in front of the property, the answer is, of course, yes. Well, we'll give you we'll help size the meter, we'll determine the fee and go on.
If I happen to be next door to Forest Lawn,
Right.
for instance?
Right.
Okay.
If you're not, then the question is who pays to extend the recycled water line to make service possible. And at this point in time now, the Glendale Municipal Code allows for the utility to pay for that. We don't have funds and we don't plan the expansion of the recycled water system today. But if you as a golf course come to us and say, I'd like to pay for the expansion myself, we'll be happy to help with the design. And
Our code permits that, and we
Of course.
help with the design. Thank you. And then, I guess last question on this subject would be, then when, actually, back up, a minor point. On the footnote regarding the Glendale Community College use of recycled water to serve some of their dual-plumbed buildings, if it's not confidential information, so far, the college is not a customer for use of that water on the playing fields or other grasses?
They are, but it's the indoor use that was significant because that was the first time we could use recycled indoor.
But so they are a customer
Yeah.
for recycled water for such things as fields and grassy areas?
Yeah.
So they would be within the column for other users?
Yeah. Yes.
So when you say that, thank you, and when you say we have no control over recycled water sales, it's just a matter of the customers coming to our door asking, saying we want more this month, and some months they don't. To my ears, that's an overstatement or perhaps overly negative way to phrase that, in that we have control in the sense of we could build out our system if we chose as a community to do so, that we would have some control if we wanted to invest in the infrastructure. And also, we would have somewhat more control over our sales if we, correct me if I'm wrong, if we allocated more staff time to, say, salesmanship in that area. For instance, having staff follow up with the kind of things that you're suggesting, a phone call, but maybe beyond, perhaps people going out and engaging in face-to-face meetings or more marketing. I mean, these things are within our, quote-unquote, they're within our ability to do if we had the interest, will, and funding to do them.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be negative in terms of what our customers use or don't use. What I meant by not having control is that if they decide, for example, that in the dual-plumb buildings at GCC, they want to not use recycled water for a month, that's their decision entirely.
I understand.
And there's nothing we can do about that.
Right, right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for that report, and we'll address the issue of a potential agenda item on recycled water at the end when we do agenda forecast, but I do like the idea.
Thank you.
Okay, next item.
Item 3D, strategic plan, quarterly scoreboard update. Ned Basson.
President Armenian, members of the commission, I'm Ned Basson, customer and support services. I'm going to go over the scoreboard for the strategic plan. Remember that this was the third quarter, so it's as of the end of March. And just as a reminder, there are three colors that are shown. Yellow is not bad. Yellow means that we're on schedule. Green means we're ahead of schedule. And red means we're behind schedule. And I'm not going to go over all of the items. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, but I will go through a selected number of them. 1.1, produce 3,856 acre cubic feet of water from the Verdugo Basin. As you can see, for the first 2 quarters, we were well ahead of schedule. The end of March, because of the need for the rate increase and bonding, we felt that we would be slowing up, and so we're still on schedule, but not ahead of schedules. 1.4, reduce water usage by 7% over 2006 base year, and Peter Kavunas just went over that. We're still doing very well on reduction of or saving of water. Under power supply, reduce electric usage by 7%. That's all green. We're ahead of schedule. We are still doing very well with our PBC programs. They are getting to the point where I think they've been pretty well used, but we have presented, and the Commission and the Council has accepted new programs for public benefit charge energy efficiency reductions. 3.1, consistently achieve above average customer satisfaction scores from the CMUA survey, and we have been doing that each time we've run that survey.
When do we run that survey?
We run a full survey every year. 1 year it's for the business, and then alternate years it's for residential. Then we run special surveys to answer specific questions, and from that we usually get feedback about how our customers are perceiving us.
What time of year is the annual?
As I recall, it's the summer, late summer. The 3.3, restore minor power outages within 10 minutes and major outages within 20 minutes, and we are doing well on that. Under rates, establish water rates at or below 80% of the average rates in the area, and we're shown as on schedule for that. Even with our recent rate increase, we are still the second lowest cost water of any of the neighboring utilities. Reduce electric rates to 35% below Southern California Edison. We are showing is on schedule for that. Right now, we are about 17% below Edison rates for a typical average use residential customer. Under power infrastructure, reduce number of preventable outages to less than 25 in a year, and we're ahead of schedule on that. Upgrade transmission system to 69 kV. That we're showing as falling behind schedule, and that has to do with budget, as is 6.3 and 6.4. 6.4 replace all electromagnetic mechanical relays and state-of-the-art relays.
And so, in the context, I know we'll talk about this in a future meeting, but in the context of a rate increase, because I assume you're saying that because of limitation of funds, that's why we're not conducting that transmission work?
Yes, we have reduced the rate at which we are doing the major work on the transmission.
So in the scenario of electric rate increases, would that work get back on schedule and get done?
Mr. President, members of the Commission, along with the bond issue, which we've rolled together with the rate increase, that is the goal, is that we would put this back on track. It's a long-term project, but we would get it back on track and begin to move forward positively again. Yes, absolutely. And if you look at the previous page, you'll notice at the bottom there was some discussion of the water infrastructure upgrades. That also applies to both the rate increase, which was recently passed, plus the bond issue we're proposing. You see they're replacing 25 miles of pipe, so that's one issue, among others in the water department infrastructure also, that we would be going after to put back online.
With the bond issue?
With the water bond issue. We're proposing 2 bonds. One will be in electrical and one will be water.
We'll address that subject separately.
Okay, those were the items I thought I would highlight, if there are any questions.
I just want to follow up on the last item. Would the upgrade to the transmission system be a critical item if we don't get the bond or the rate increase? That would still have to be done?
Mr. Boeg's making his way up, Commissioner Yao. I think it is critical. There's no question. But if we do not get the revenue that we are proposing, we're going to be hard pressed to do this or other long-term infrastructure projects. We'll probably find ourselves doing most immediate emergency response type work if, in fact, the revenue sources don't come in.
Well, and then how can we maintain a strategy of 4.2 reduction of rates? Is that mutually contradictory?
SC raises its rates.
Ah.
Right.
Thank you. Well, that's the answer, is it? I see.
No,
All
because
right.
I was getting to the point where I think Councilman Manukian was raising that the transfer or the increase in rates could potentially impact the needs of the utility. So if we're saying that these might not be enough where we don't have an issue with transferring those funds, then it's a done deal. But if we're saying that these are the critical infrastructure that needs to be done, then a transfer shouldn't take place, as some argue. But that's something that I just want to raise because the councilman raised it.
Should or should not?
The transfer shouldn't take place if these are the needs of the utility that should take place before any transfer can be made.
Right.
Yeah, if I may address the transmission, if you look at the date that we're targeting and that we're looking at 2023, the upgrade to 69 kV is more for efficiency and increased reliability. But one of the things that we can assure you is we have changed the way we approach things. Every time we touch our 34 kV system, if we have to touch the any portion of it, we automatically upgrade. The system, the insulating system, from 34.5 to 69,000 volts. The only part that we can't touch right now, because that demands a lot of revenue, is the substation end to complete it. And to add to that, there are only 2 critical transmission lines that we need to complete, and that is tied to when we do the Grandview substation. Once we do the Grandview substation, then there are 2 parts of the transmission system that we need to upgrade, and we're planning to do that as part of the bonding that we're doing in the coming future. So the critical parts are getting done, and you have my assurance that we're not letting the system go down fast. When if we have to do any work, any O&M part, we take advantage of that so that the economies of scale that we call, we touch it once so that the only remaining thing that we need to do is the actual conversion.
I have a question. This is regarding 5.3 and 6.5. Can you explain what does implement effective asset management entails? Now, I noticed for the water side, it's in the red, it's behind schedule, but for the power side, it's right on schedule.
The power side has been tied to some of the new implementation of the smart grid, where we will be implementing some software that provides better control. The water system is somewhat similar, but because they have had the need for that water rate increase, they have not moved as quickly.
So this is related to smart grid?
It is. I think for them it is less so than it is for the electric system.
Okay. And will the smart grid system, when you have time and I guess staff and budget to go back to it, then that should help, right?
Yes, that's so.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other questions on the? Are there Mr. Basson, are there any things that are, I know you pointed to certain things, but is there any one thing that you would say is out of the ones that are behind schedule that need to be looked at? Or Mr. Zern? I am seeing a lot of red.
And my response, Mr. President, members of the Commission, is obviously I'm looking at all of these. These are things that I'm becoming more acclimated with. I'm not as acclimated as the staff is with them, but they're part of my overall review. You'll see things in here especially that were all read about regarding the finances. Whoops, I'm sorry. Exactly says implement new Department of Finance processes for GWP transactions. So a lot of that has to do with the restructuring of the administration. Last meeting I introduced, or Mr. Campbell was introduced to you as our finance administrator. So getting him acclimated and in and looking at these different things will begin to get us moving in a forward motion on that, along with the energy management group and looking and auditing all of those as well. So those are a couple of the red areas that I see that are a primary focus of what I'm looking at. And I think we'll begin to see some progress made as we move forward with the restructured finance administration and the restructured administration overall.
Well, I hope as part of, I know we'll hear at a future date your 90-day report, that some of these sorts of items that are the red will be included in there as well.
That is my hope, Mr. President. And Mr. Basson, you may have more. I don't know. Those are ones that I just...
Well, the other red that really sticks out, and the Commission has looked at this several times, is the workforce block and safety. And as I've said before, the red indicates that we're behind a goal. It doesn't mean that we're in danger zone. And I think it was about 2 months ago, we talked quite extensively about the safety situation. We're actually at kind of parity with our surrounding municipal utilities on the safety statistic. We're just not meeting the goal that we have set for ourselves. And we have, and I think I described 2 months ago, some of the things that we are doing to try to reduce our incidence of accidents to reach our goal. So hopeful that with a little time and a little more work on the programs and on the driving training, we will see some better numbers from that.
One last question. I just have one quick question on a worst-case scenario, because we're talking about rates and potential bond issuance. What impact would that have on these strategic goals if we don't get the rate increase or the bond? Are there any significant areas of impact?
I think, Mr. Yao, the answer to that is I'm assuming there would be, but we'll have to go back through when we see what the end result is and reassess the goals to the position we find ourselves in and what the exact impact of those will be. I think it could greatly change our strategic outlook for at least the short term. So that would be part of something else that would be included in my observations, is if those things don't in fact happen, what's the impact to the utility as a result, from day-to-day operations all the way through strategic planning?
Because I just anticipate that question will be asked by council as well, because
it's a good question.
Have it, and they'll have an appetite for increases, but potentially they want to plan for the worst case. What are those areas where they need to pinpoint where they have to make additional adjustments? If they don't want to raise their rates, these are the impact that the utility have to lay out for them and
Correct.
give them that choice.
And we have some scenarios out there that are more general in nature, but it may require us to drill down on those and show exactly where some of these impacts will be, and then how those will relate to different things such as service provision, customer service, and the impact potentially on the ratepayers.
To follow up on that, is the utility expecting to utilize a consultant like the Wildan firm was utilized to provide data and worst-case scenario planning for the water rate?
Yes, we actually have, and help me, Ned, with the...
EES.
EES is the firm we have used, and they've completed their work. They're still fine-tuning it as different different issues come up. We have some legal issues that we've continued to have to review in the wake of Prop 26 and others. So as Ms. Godinez continues to look at those, that could alter the final draft of what the firm does. But the short answer to your question is yes, we have enlisted them, and they've done quite a bit of work already.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we do have speaker cards, but given the time, I'm going to have to, there's already 6 speaker cards ahead of us, and at the normal 5 minutes apiece, that would be 30 minutes of speaking time, and we're already at almost 5:35. So in an effort we're still going to end up going over our 6 p.m. Time slot, but I don't want it to go for a whole lot more. So I'm going to limit speaking time to 3 minutes. For all the remaining speakers, and like I said, there are usually same speakers on multiple topics, so you'll have plenty of opportunity to speak on different topics. So next speaker on this particular topic, strategic plan, item 3D, Mr. Herbert Milano.
Thank you, Commission President Armenian, members of the Commission, and staff. My name is Herbert Milano. The idea of implementing a strategic plan and the summaries that you're getting, I always said is a step, in the right direction. Getting a chance for the staff to explain whether certain goals are being met. What we don't get oftentimes is how these goals are being measured. So I'm going to run through this rather fairly quickly. On item 2.1, which is reduce electrical usage by 7%, I wondered if that's 7% overall for the city, or if the goal really is to try to reduce it 7% per unit, which I think it may be a more worthwhile approach to say, are we helping each resident reduce their electric consumption? On item 4.1 and 4.2, reducing water rates, the first one, 4.1, reducing water rates below 80% below the average rates in the area, I think is commendable. But I always had a problem with 4.2, which basically is comparing us to a private industry fees and charges, which is a for-profit entity, rather than other public utilities in the area, which I think would be a better measure. On item, on the workforce, I would really be interested in finding out as a proper way of doing some type of accountability with regard to productivity is what is the number of personnel that we need to produce 1 gigawatt of electricity? Or how much personnel do we need to produce 1 acre-feet of water internally, and how much to actually redistribute it from the Metropolitan Water District? And I think those are the numbers that allow us to gauge a little bit better in terms of the productivity internally, which I understand is impacted by the quality of the infrastructure. But the other thought that I bring back are these basically cost accounting concepts. What is the cost of labor and pensions per gigawatt hour, and how do they compare to the prior years? Without that comparison, I think that you're not going to be in a position to evaluate whether the utility is headed in the right direction or not. And the last item that I think is really significant is the level of reporting that you need to have to figure out what is the overall backlog of the infrastructure needed, in a way that is quantifiable, not just in value, but in terms of actual units of something, right? Like you say, we need 3,000 feet of additional water lines at 8 inches, something along those lines. Because without a listing of that kind, you're in a way in the blind for not knowing what is being postponed and how critical they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Harry Zavos.
Before I begin, I'm passing this document out, and the public can always see it online by going to this address.
You want to state the address so that people can hear
Oh, it's www.oggc.org/Zavos with a capital Z.pdf. And this is a document, incidentally, that I prepared for oral communication, but it's relevant to remarks that were made, that were just made. My name is Harry Zavos. I'm a citizen of Glendale, and the issue arose regarding needed capital improvements, critical capital improvements, and the comment was made about Mr. Manukian indicating the need to take care of capital improvements before the transfer, and that is consistent with the charter requirements. The first part of this handout is a chart that
Mr.
indicates...
Zavos, if I may, this is not relevant to the agendized topic. If you want to speak about this under oral communications, you may.
No, I brought it up because the question was about the transmission power lines and whether they would do it by bond and borrow, and the issue was raised, I think Mr. Yao said about Mr. Manukian saying that the transfers shouldn't take place and those should be used instead for the infrastructure, and that's what I'm responding to, what was said here by the Commission.
But
Well,
that's
I
not a
would've-
Brown Act. We haven't advertised that that would be on this agenda item, so I don't think that the comments of any one commissioner re-advertised to the community compliant with the Brown Act.
It would have to, Mr. Zavos, it would have to deal directly with why we're behind or not behind, since that's what we're on.
So, in other words, the funding of that would be out of order, and that's
What
why
I'm
that-
saying is you would have to apply it to a specific item on the scoreboard.
Well,
The item on the agenda is strategic plan quarterly scoreboard update. So if you could kindly tie your comments to that item, otherwise you can speak under oral
Well,
communications.
if I'm out of order, that's fine, and I suspect I'm out of order for the other one, too, because it had to do with workforce, and it had to do with some concern that I had over comments that were made about the having to be a zero capital improvement budget if, in fact, there is no electrical increase. And if that's out of order, I won't even open the subject.
You can speak on that under oral communications, because that's
No,
not
no,
an
I've
agenda
got something else I'll talk about, oral communications. All right.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 3E, Smart Grid Update, Craig Keenan.
Mr. President, Commission members, Craig Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. Here to give you the update on the Smart Grid project. I'm going to cover two broad areas. The first is our obligations under the DOE contract, the components of the project. It's been a little while since I've been here, and things on customer support. And then I'm going to look at the budget, the time phase budget, our expenditures, and some challenges we're facing right now. So under this is the DOE, Department of Energy, California Energy Commission project. This is just the electric portion. We signed our contract in March 3rd, 2010. What's called the implementation phase is 3-year phase, which means we're supposed to have all the work done by March 2nd, 2013, and then we have a 2 years more of reporting on our results. The total project for the electric was $51,302,105. We had a $20 million grant, so that left our funding commitment of just over $31 million. We had an additional $1 million grant from the California Energy Commission, so the net cost of this project to GWP is just over $30.3 million. There's 4 basic parts of the project. We have the new smart meters and the meter data management system. That is in. We just had some new customer programs approved by City Council the other night, and I'll list what those are. We have a distribution automation pilot that we're working on, and a whole new enterprise computer architecture and set of systems. These are the programs that were just approved by City Council, and they get to some of the things you were talking about earlier. This mobile MyConnect, it would be an add-on to the O-Power Home Energy Report, so you could get that information on your smartphone. You could also get sort of alerts. You could go in and sign up and say, tell me if my bill is going to exceed this amount over the next month or 2 months, and you'd get warnings. And so it's to integrate that web-based tool into a smartphone or iPad-type application, and we'll be working on that in the next 6 months with them. We're also looking at smart thermostats. One company is the Nest thermostat. The other one is, I believe, through Honeywell, but we'll be looking at others too. That would be an incentive program.
That's one that council approved?
Yes.
Great.
This other one is an online, it's online educational tool. Well, it's more of a social media, online, smartphone kind of thing where we're working with a local company first on a pilot where it sort of turns education and engagement into a game, and we can then go out to those 30,000 plus customers whether we do have their email address and ask them if they want to participate in this. And you reach out to them and you throw a question out there and they get to click and say, yeah, I want to answer this. And if they answer it right, they get so many points and maybe get a prize of some kind. But it's a way to get them engaged, to go sign up to our additional programs. Maybe they go to O-Power and sign up for the web-based things that we have, and they'll get points for that. So we're going to test that out, a new way to engage people. The Green Button program, that's through the I forget, National Institute of Technology. It's a DO or a federal government program where customers can go online, hit a button, they call it the green button, download their interval data from their electric, and we hope water as well, and then they can use it in third-party apps that they might buy, and then play around with their electric and water data. The business analytics, it's sort of a web-based program for businesses. We have the O-Power web-based for residents. This will be for businesses so they can go get access to their data. And then we're also looking at a company it's a really inexpensive way to do rebates. It's all online or on smartphones, and it all gets processed online and through the smartphone back to our office, and then the rebate is an add-on to their bill instead of processing paper and checks, and it's just a quicker, more convenient way for them to get a rebate. And the smart rate engine, we're working with O-Power on that as well. Part of the DOE project was experimental rates or time of use type rates. We'll be looking at electric vehicle rates. And what that would, a customer could go online and click on different things to see what their bill would have been if they had signed up for, say, this time of use rate or this electric vehicle rate. And it's just a quick way for them to see what rate option they should be on. So those are some programs where
right now it's limited in terms of what those rate options are.
You have a time of use rate through the company that Mr. Zern just mentioned as far as for the rates. They're looking at changing that TOE to be more advantageous to people. And part of that would be some electric vehicle rates, because we do have about 35 customers with electric vehicles right now. And that's growing.
Who are charging on a separate meter?
They have a separate meter, but they're just on the regular rate right now. So I wanted to throw this in because we had this discussion about surveys. We had done a survey a few weeks ago where we asked some residential customers some questions, and one of them had to do with the smart grid, because about every 6 or 8 months we would ask our customers this question as part of one survey or another. And I just wanted to point out that when we started the smart grid project, there was 54% of the customers thought it was a very good idea. And then that number started to drop from 50 to 44, and we expected that because we were spending the money and putting the meters up, but they couldn't use the data. Another reason is if between the 50 and the 44 was, I don't even like to mention it, but when they were the RF issues and the privacy issues, and since those have all been resolved, you can see it's gone back up to 55%.
What was the sample size on this?
It was a small sample size. I believe it was 100 customers because we were just doing a quick survey. So, next. Okay, so we'll go on to the budget and the challenges. This, I believe, is through May. So our budgeted amount through May was $47.4 million. The DOE, our expenditure, and the POP, the requirement, we projected it to be about 44.3. We spent around 40.9, close to 41 million. And the net cost to us with the grants monies we've already received so far is about 21.9. We received around 20 million from DOE and the California Energy Commission. As far as the challenges, well, the budget, we had to cut our capital budget. We expected to spend $10 million this year on smart grid. That's been cut down to $450,000. We are in the process of trying to identify some funding to keep some projects going until the rate issue is resolved. I think we've been successful at that. Potential to partially restore the budget if we do get the rate increase in bonding. Just to give you an idea of the things that are out there pending to be done, and we do have staff in place, and consultants and contract workers are ready to do this work, so we're hoping we get this issue resolved. But we have the enterprise service bus. That ties all our computer systems together, not just for GWP, but the city was going to use that kind of system as well. We bought the software and hardware. We just needed the staff to hook it up. The distribution management, outage management system, we bought that. We need to engage the consultants to do the software integration on that. There's a lot of talk about our scorecard and managing all those goals and data and tracking. One of the things in the smart grid was business intelligence tools and systems. That's on hold. That's the tools that allow us to use all the data we're collecting to do all these projections, to set these goals, to be able to track, in real time, pretty much tracking our progress towards a lot of these financial goals and other types of goals.
Question on that?
Yes.
So the public understands it as well as the commission. The project budget cut on your second bullet point.
Right.
That was an internal budget cut under Mr. Steiger. That was a council budget cut. That was
the budget that was approved. Our capital budget, I don't know what it was originally, but it got cut down to just over $4 million from upwards of...
Meaning the city adopted budget
Yes.
Correct.
for
Correct.
fiscal 12-13.
Ms. Dentler, coming into this budget year, we had what when it was presented to the council was a zero-based budget where the capital part of the program had been reduced on the electric side to some regulatory mandates and some safety projects that needed to be done. On the water side, I think we left it as one upgrade to part of the water distribution system in Adams Hill. That was it. That's what's in the approved budget, pending any enhancements we have to our revenue.
I heard $4 million was mentioned. Is that 450,000?
Yes,
or
450,000. The only thing
Let's drop
that's
to
in
450, okay.
the only thing in the capital budget for the smart grid right now is an upgrade to our storage area network that we have to have in place in order to start billing off the system.
What was the differential between the proposed budget cut submitted by Mr. Steiger and the resulting budget cut that exited out of City Council?
I had planned a budget of around $10 million so we could meet our obligation by March 2nd of 2013, and that got cut to $450,000.
By council?
I
Well, Mr. President, members of the commission, and Ms. Dentler, you referred to what was presented by Mr. Steiger, and again, I was watching from the periphery on this.
I understand.
But what was presented by Mr. Steiger was the zero-based budget.
Which is the 450?
The 450,000. He and his staff went through a significant exercise to reduce their budget in order to meet the current financial situation that the utility found itself in. So that's essentially what was presented.
That's what I wanted to know.
Ideally, I think what Mr. Keenan is referring to, the plan would have been to get the $10 million, which I believe is pretty close, $11 million to what we need to finish what was the original project scope. But because of the situation we find ourselves in, we've reduced it down to...
But when Mr. Steiger was asked for his zero-based budget dollar amount, that was it?
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Yes.
And if I just may add, Mr. Keenan identified this bridge funding, which is a little bit more money that helps us keep a couple of extra programs going within the smart grid. And it looks like we found some alternatives to that using other funding sources and some other grant funds that we have. So we'll be able to move that 450 up a little bit, but still far less than the $10 million.
Just a follow-up question to that. Do we, or next time, can we get a list of the items that you actually budgeted for with the $10 million, and then what was actually cut, what will actually be implemented with the extra funding? Significant
Yes.
cut, so
Yes.
and we have no idea.
Yeah,
I think,
that's
of what was
I can
planned
give you a
for.
detailed one. Generally, though, it's the integrating of the enterprise service bus, the distribution management, outage management system, the business intelligence tools and system. We had a whole program to integrate our existing asset management type system into a holistic one that could meet the requirements that are in the strategic plan. That's on hold. And the distribution automation pilot, where we're automating 4 feeders and going to test our systems and abilities to do that automation, that's on hold too.
So what I think would be helpful, Mr. Keenan, in terms of the next time you're giving an update, is to not only list them, but I think explain the trade-offs that are in front of us between funding or not funding. And if we don't fund, what are the long-term impacts to getting a return on investment for having come this far in making these investments? I'm very concerned, I have to say, when I hear things like what you said, which is, we've bought this, but, we don't have anyone to install it. This is technology at the end of the day. We're in the technology game now, which means there's depreciation happening, and this stuff is aging as we speak, and we're not getting any benefit after having spent the money to purchase things. So I find it very, very troubling that we would make this sort of trade-off without a closer examination of what the long-term impacts are to getting the return on investment to the smart grid system that we've all invested in. I understand all the pressures around for budgets, but it feels like we've, made some sacrifices here for to get to the overall balanced budget without really looking at the more qualitative impacts on the system and the investment we've made. Because, as I've said before, you come this far, we're only now about to start getting the ROI on our investments, and we have to get to that for this all to be worth it. And I find it very troubling that we've, $10 million, I'm sure, at that last portion of this is when you're actually going to start getting your benefits out of the system. This isn't about smart meters. Smart meters are maybe the symbol of the system because they're visible in front of every customer. But the reality is the system itself and the back-end systems are where we're going to accomplish the savings for the utilities, the information for the customers, and we haven't even gotten into the part about customer engagement and getting customers to start seeing the benefits of what they've paid for. So I would like to dive into that, and maybe we can address that under agendizing.
Sure.
And Mr. President, members of the Commission, this is something we plan to have ready to present to you as well when we talk about the rates. So you will see that August 4th or 6th. But at that meeting, we will have, along with the other capital improvement projects that we had planned, a lot more detail on that, so you can see that and what the impacts, because you make very valid points.
I want to make a couple of comments. I want to echo President Armenian's comments. Not once have I heard that the smart grid program would be decreased so dramatically within the last year. I know we've talked about, having to cut back on some of the programs, we don't get this, we don't get that, but every time all of the commissioners would ask, is that something we can live with? And not once have I heard such a dramatic cut. So I am very surprised as well. So I am concerned, just like what President Armenian stated. We need to really look at the detailed list next time, before we go ahead and recommend to council, a certain budget. And I think that's pretty significant and important for it not to have specifically brought up in the commission meeting. Thanks.
I have a couple of comments. One, I think we discussed this in the customer service update, but I would really like to, for GWP to make an initiative of collecting customers' email addresses. I think this should be a top priority. There is so much communication that can be passed to customers that it's going to, save cost, help in emergencies, leaks, general updates. I mean, you name it. There's so many specific benefits to communicating with customers when their power is down. They still have their mobile devices that can get an email or something that'll help in numerous situations. Second, I also want to know if, talking about the smart grid and how much of a budget cut we had, but I believe there are numerous IT implementations that can be done that can potentially save a lot of money. For example, and this may be being done, I'm not aware of it, we are gathering now so much information from these meters, and we can track the usage of water and power minute every hour and whatnot. And that information can potentially, we can have, for example, a programmed, very easily programmed reports that detect leaks, and automated reports that are sent to customers without any manual involvement. Or if a specific, for example, a specific report that's programmed that catches or captures if a specific consumer is using water at specific parts of the day, that consumer can email the report that says, listen, at this time of the day, every day for the past 30 days, you're using electricity. Can you try to switch it, whatever you're doing, try to push back that usage, and you'll save that much money. If we can pass them the rate, the amount of electricity rates that we're paying for at that time can be reduced significantly, which can help, reduce their rate, which can help us with our strategic plan of reducing, reaching our goals. I mean, there's so many benefits that could be implemented that will actually impact the bottom line, that I don't think will cost that much more money. I'm not sure, how much IT personnel we have that can do this, but I cannot imagine that those trade-offs will not be worthwhile.
Well, that's an excellent point. And we have done an RFP for the business intelligence tools that would do just that for us, and we have selected a vendor. We have a price. We don't have the money to actually sign the contract. That's been put off for about a year.
But have we done the analysis of the amount of potential cost savings that will equal to if we implement certain reports and have the customer communication via email or some sort of regular communication that actually gets consumers involved, especially if we can pass back the rate decrease to them. I think consumers, as we've seen during the conservation process, that consumers are saving 15 to 20% regularly.
Yeah.
I think because they're saving money.
Yes.
And I think if we can pass them the electrical rate reduction rates as well, I think we'll see similar results. And, by switching, power usage by certain hours, we save much more than 20%, much, much more. So passing, a portion of that and then keeping the rest of the revenue to help meet our budgetary needs, I think is a very deep analysis that needs to be done and presented to council and us, obviously.
Yeah, and that's exactly my concern, is that I'm really afraid that the decision was not made with that sort of detailed enough trade-off information, whereby, I feel like it was made in the larger picture of we need to get to a balanced budget overall, and so everyone cough up money, as opposed to making some very detailed analytics on the trade-offs with what can be gained on the other side of the equation with the, completing the investment, which is why we made the investment to begin with, not just because we wanted to be, get the headlines for having a smart grid city, but, we did it because we were going to gain efficiencies in the system and customers were going to benefit. So I'm just afraid that these decisions were made kind of in the haste of trying to balance the budget, and GWP is a natural place to come and get a lot of money to get to that number, magic number. So I hope what we can do in the next round is to do an analysis accompanied with some numbers that Commissioner Jemian is mentioning, and therefore, start to replan this in the context of moving forward on which projects, ought to move forward because of this or that savings, and then Mr. Zern can take that into account in terms of how you're reformulating the finances at GWP.
And Mr. President, members of the Commission, Mr. Jemian, those are excellent comments. And since the email issue has come up twice now, I will go back and take a look, working with Mr. Keenan and Tammy, to see what the long-term viability of incorporating that into the system. Again, I'm far from an expert, but I know that one of the huge advantages of moving on to this next phase is the ability for the customer to proactively monitor their own usage and make those kind of decisions that you're talking about to better their own situation with regards to the cost of their bill and the consumption of energy. I will say this, when this was presented to council, again, from where I was sitting, council members did mention the fact that we have come this far, and to not be able to finish this last part of it would just not seem to be the prudent business decision to make. So there's definitely a recognition on the part of council. And again, with regards to the GWP budget, this was not lumped in with the general city budget where we had the issues of redevelopment and the $15 million. This stood on its own in relation to the current financial situation of the utility. So that doesn't make your situation or the comments you've made any better. It just puts it into the kind of reality that it did get looked at in and of itself. And there was recognition that it would seem to not be prudent business for us to have come as far as we have and not finish it. But again, that'll all come back up again as we talk about rates and bonds, and we will re-emphasize that.
And I would suggest putting in front of council in that rates and bonds presentation and when you come to us, but we've already heard it from the customer service update. I thought it was excellent for the customer service update to tell us very bluntly, very candidly, when Commissioner Chan asked, would you characterize it as a backlog or how's it going? I mean, staff needs to do exactly what happened today. Tell us, yes, there's a significant backlog. To have no email addresses and a significant backlog in helping our customers find out whether they have a water leak after we've invested all this upfront costs and the federal government has invested in us, which is our tax dollars in a general way. So it's really frustrating to hear that we can't even, that we're manually dealing with a significant backlog even just to help people figure out their leaks. The council needs to hear it in that way, and the public needs to hear it in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just...
Oh, yeah, sorry.
The other two bullets, I have let DOE know that we're going to need a one-year extension, at least a one-year extension, and they are coming to visit again in mid-September, mid-October time.
And have they expressed understanding?
Oh, yeah. I believe pretty much everyone else that got a grant has already asked for the one-year extension.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do have a speaker, Mr. Milano. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Commission President Armenian. My name is Herbert Milano. Here's one time where I wish I had more time to discuss and bring some of my background. Mr. Armenian, I have been installing computerized systems to fairly, medium-sized companies for 25 years. And one of the first things that I tell my clients is that 66% of the time, the objectives in implementing a new system fail to achieve what the company intended. 66%. It is the same today as it was 10 years ago, as it was 20 years ago. Because there's a significant problem. There is a lack of knowledge from the individuals purchasing the system, and a lack of awareness with regard to the rest of the staff and everybody involved. When these things were brought up initially, I mentioned something. You don't want to be on the bleeding edge. And I would never recommend to any of my customers, as a consultant, to be one of the first in anything. Not the first one to implement an operating system, not the first to implement any kind of equipment, because you do not get the advantage of all of the lessons that particular vendor has learned through their other implementations. You don't get to interview the failures. You don't get to interview and get the value from all the experience and all the cost that has occurred someplace else. I also have mentioned for a long time, another thing that is important, what can go wrong, and spend as much time as possible on that side of the evaluation as on the positive and the dog and pony show that generally comes before it. Look, the errors that have occurred in private industry have been huge. One major pharmaceutical company went under, all because their order entry system would not work after the implementation. And I can give you a list. So this is nothing unusual. I see it all the time. I'm consulting with another organization today, and I'm going through the very same process to convince the board of directors that this process of implementing a system is no panacea. It's a difficult thing to do it accurately, which means that the amount of planning that is required is significant. What happens, though, in private industry is that people are held accountable. I personally would like to see who were the individuals who pushed this thing as hard as they pushed it when you had $500 million of infrastructure that needed repair. That, to me, is what doesn't happen in government Or you can assign to the individual, says, here is this manager who was pushing this product again and again, trying to do whatever he could to push this thing on you. Because it means that you're not going to get a proper evaluation of a project. Project management is difficult to do. And on being on a bleeding edge and being the first to do something, you're just opening up yourself for trouble. It's no pleasure for me to come in and relish on this. It's great that they're accepting that there are problems significant, but there's so much more to say about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 5, old business. A, electric rate community outreach update. Ramona Boeg, Martin Powers.
Mr. President.
Are we going out of order in terms of oral communications?
I apologize.
Yes.
Item 4, oral communications.
Okay, Mr. Zavos.
Commission, my name is Harry Zavos, and the city has a practice at the beginning of the fiscal year of having a budgeted appropriation for a specific sum of electrical receipts to be transferred to the general fund to support general services. The rationale given for this is that the charter authorizes 25% of GWP operating revenues to be so transferred. In point of fact, this practice conflicts with the charter. Now, I've given you a chart which indicates how the relevant charter-created funds operate, and the first fund is the GWP Revenue Funds, one for water, one for electric, and all receipts are credited to that fund. And then it shows where those receipts can go. Those are the 4 lines coming out. I'm not going to deal with each one of them. But the one on your far right deals with money that goes to the surplus fund. There is no money authorized to go from the revenue funds to any general fund. And Section 20, which is the first page of following the chart, the last paragraph proscribes the amount of monies in those revenue funds that can go to the surplus fund. And let me read that. The credit balance, if any, it contemplates there may be none, the credit balance, if any, or any part thereof, in each of said funds at the end of the fiscal year, the amount of which is in excess of the amount of all outstanding demands and liabilities unpaid from said fund on account of the budgeted appropriations therefrom, after that's been taken care of, shall be transferred to the Glendale Water and Power Surplus Fund. How many minutes did I get?
3.
I have no time to do it. But let me just say this, that you can't have the transfer to the surplus fund be a line item budgeted item, and at the same time have be the excess that's left over after you take care of all budgeted appropriations. And that's why the charter says you make that determination as to what can be transferred at the end of the fiscal year, not the city's practice of doing it at the beginning of the year. Why? Because you can only know what excess is left after you've taken care of all the budgeted appropriations at the end of the fiscal year, not at the beginning of the year. And I would direct you to Section 22, which creates a surplus fund, and it's from the surplus fund that monies can go to what's called the General Reserve Fund. And that first paragraph again indicates that what gets into the fund, I thought I had 5 minutes.
Commissioner Dentler has a question for you.
Is the city attorney
The city attorney has a copy of this, and as indicated I guess it was 2 weeks ago when Mr. Zavos spoke about this, we are looking at this issue.
Mr. Herbert Milano.
President Armenia, members of the Commission, my name is Herbert Milano. It pains me to come to these meetings every month and not see this room filled with members of the public. It is not as if people were not affected by it, by what you do and the decisions that you make. I originally became interested because my tenants started calling me or stopping me when I was doing my walk around the building and said, "Mr. Herbert, how come my electricity rates are so high?" And I decided to start figuring out and compare and do a little bit of a study. And one thing leads to another, and you begin to ask questions, and I try to see if they make sense and if the answers make sense. And the first things that I began to notice is that a lot of the reports that I would expect, or the transparency in terms of how cogent the information is, wasn't there. I can dig into a financial report, I can sort of get a sense of understanding, but it doesn't really give it to you because financial reports are historical documents. And oftentimes it doesn't tell you where the gaps are. You can read the financial reports and it doesn't tell you what the backlog of the infrastructure has been. It was only later that when Mr. Savos came on board and started becoming active that I realized, hey, I really had not read the charter. I just sort of assumed that the things that were told to you and to the general public were pretty much prima facie truths. And what I find that that's not the case. I began to interview a lot of businesses, merchants primarily, and I started asking them whether they knew they were able to evaluate their electric fees. And oftentimes they had a story for me. The story was, I cannot understand how we can pay more than we do in Burbank. And that was usually the answer. I know somebody in Burbank and they're paying a lot less. I know somebody in LA and they're paying a lot less. And we got all this amazing number of charges that are included in the bill. That, boy, I could spend another hour just telling you about, what I found out. So we are about to do an outreach, right? And we supposedly are supposed to measure effectiveness. We got an outreach that is taking place at the police station at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, supposedly to reach this area. What person, if they cannot come here in the evening or late afternoon, how can they go out there and convey their displeasure or their concerns or their worries? I think that this outreach must be measured, establish outcomes, and say, look, I want a minimum of 1,000 individuals involved. If not, I consider it a failure. But we need to go and apply effective measures to this purpose. Thank you very much.
Next item.
Item 5, old business, electric rate community outreach update. Ramona Boeg, Martin Powers.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, at our previous meeting on June 14th, a question came up. I believe it was initiated through the discussion of the Electric Rate Advisory Committee, and I believe Ms. Dentler asked me the question: was it our intention to have this be the limit to our community outreach? My comment was I didn't have enough grasp of it at the time. My sense was that was what was originally considered, but it was not my personal desire to do that. So having gone back with the staff and rediscussed it, we've come up with a much more comprehensive community outreach plan, which Mr. Powers is going to go through with you, that includes not only community meetings, but mass advertising and appearances on certain television shows to try best to get the message out, direct mailings to our large business customers. Mr. Milano mentions the afternoon meeting, which is the one of the 4 meetings that we've focused on our business customers, who often prefer a daytime meeting in order to come and although the general public is more than welcome in the afternoon, our other 3 meetings are all in the evening, which would be more conducive to residents who have come home from work. So with that, let me have Mr. Powers briefly go through this and answer any questions you may have about it.
Thank you, Mr. Zern. Good afternoon, President Armenian, members of the Commission. My name is Martin Powers, Public Benefits Coordinator. You'll notice in your packet there is a list of the outreach that we've completed to date, as well as a proposed list of outreach that we will do in the coming weeks up and through the community meetings, as well as a copy of the public meeting flyer, which we did have translated into Armenian, Korean, and Spanish. I'll try to keep my comments as brief as possible. Just want to let you know that we will be advertising the public meetings in English-speaking newspapers as well as ethnic newspapers over the next 2.5 weeks to reach out to folks. We've also utilized our newsletter, The Source, which is mailed to all GWP customers in Glendale, as well as the city's newsletter, City Connections. In an effort to reach out to business customers, our key accounts section has sent emails to our top 300 customers, as well as mailed letters to, we've mailed letters to the top 300 customers and sent emails to our top 100 customers. We will be meeting with these customers on an as-requested basis to explain the proposed rate increase once we know exactly what that is. In addition to the business customers, we've distributed 3,000 flyers throughout the community, City of Glendale facilities, parks, libraries. We've had flyers passed out at St. Mary's Armenian Church via the Montrose Shopping Park Association, the Glendale Parent Teacher Association, the Glendale Kiwanis Club, and we will continue to distribute flyers in the coming weeks.
What are the flyers? I'm sorry.
The copy of the flyers.
The flyers are the one we have in our packet?
Correct. One thing that we're going to do that I think is pretty unique is that we are going to record one of the community meetings and post it on our website. For folks who are not able to attend the meetings, we realize that there are only 3 meetings right now, and so for folks who aren't able to attend those, we will have that available on Channel 6 and on our website. The unique thing, though, is that being able to watch a meeting, folks might have questions, and we will have a special email account set up for customers watching the video to submit questions, and GWP staff will do our best to respond within 24 to 48 hours of receiving that question. And one other thing I'd like to point out is that as far as our community outreach is concerned, we are in the process of scheduling a 4th meeting as a direct result at the request of a community group who requested a special meeting, and that will be open to the public, but it's still yet to be determined.
Who is the community group?
The Armenian National Committee.
I have a question for
Sure.
you. So at these meetings, is there a presentation that GWP will make about, here's what we're proposing, here's why we're proposing it? I mean, is it going to get into details?
Yes, Mr. President, what our plan is to have a staff presentation where we go everywhere from history into the current situation, talk a little bit about what our needs are, and then get into some of the options for the rate increases, with a lot of emphasis, especially in the general community meetings, of how that impacts the customer, not just on a percentage basis, but how does that affect them in their bill. We'll have then some breakout sessions within those meetings that allow individuals to go into smaller groups or to go to individuals specifically on staff to talk about issues that may directly impact them, that are a little more specific than what the general presentation will be. Then we'll bring the whole group back together for general questions and answers at the end of the meeting.
So given that the first one being proposed is on July 11th, which is next week, I mean, does this mean that GWP has already done all the studying of what the rates ought to be and has kind of run the numbers on all this, that yet you're going to be presenting proposed rate increases by July 11th, or are you just going to be talking in general terms?
That's my question, too.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, as we indicated earlier, we've had a consultant on board for some time now evaluating these, and we as a staff have been evaluating those as well. So working with the advisory committee, which we held our second meeting last Thursday, we presented them a draft of what we would be presenting in general to anyone that we were going out to talk to. And it included some scenarios on specific increases in the rates. Over a 5-year period, we're showing several different options on percentage increases and what that does for us from a general business standpoint. Getting anywhere from our cash reserves to our capital program back on track. All of these, as I mentioned earlier, include a bond issue, so you can see their debt service and those kind of things. So it gets into a pretty fair amount of detail once we get these presentations rolling. Again, the general community may not be as interested in some of the things or the details that the business community might, so we're ready to tailor this whichever way we can best answer questions for those folks.
So in theory, at least the way the timing is laid out here, you are going to the public with all this information before you're coming to the Commission. I know we discussed that we're searching for a date for a special commission meeting.
Correct.
To discuss this as well. Since that is the order you're choosing to do it in, does that mean that at the commission meeting where we discuss this, you would also have some sort of analysis of what the reaction of people are and kind of in other words, may that inform your recommendations to the commission ultimately?
Yes, sir. That is our goal. From the advisory committee on down through our community meetings, we'd be able to relate to you what the response has been, what the concerns are. But what we felt was a general discussion of a rate increase is really not going to benefit the customer. They want to know how this is going to impact them and consequently what that gets them in regards to the upgrade of the utility, customer service, reliability, and those kind of things. So we wanted to get into a little bit more specific discussion on that. So yeah, absolutely. We will be bringing back to you what the response and comments we've received have been.
My comment is too late to help the current flyer that has already been distributed, 3,000 of them. And I commend you. I think distributing flyers is a good thing, but it doesn't get you the best community input back if the flyers don't do the best possible job conveying to the public why they should come to the meeting. And just my comment would be if you're going to tinker with the flyer or if you're going to use the flyer by posting it on the website, I would suggest maybe revisiting the design so that when people go to the website or when they arrive at the community meetings, there's a flyer that draws people's visual attention to the fact that the meetings are about potential rate hikes. Because, I mean, you'd have to put your reading glasses on and drop down to the second really small print font on the second line to even notice that it's about an electric rate increase. And I would suggest maybe a visual like a lightning bolt or a dollar sign or something, really not to our community's benefit or a favor to City Council or to the Commission to, in any sense, hide the ball. We need people to turn out, hear what people think. I know it's not a popular topic, but I just don't think the flyer does a good job visually of announcing what the topic is of the meeting. And if you're going to add info to the website or redo flyers or put print advertising in newsletters and newspapers, I would suggest a redesign of the flyer.
One more comment. It would have been really nice to have email addresses for people and businesses so we can distribute these flyers much more effectively. Really nice.
Duly noted.
Thank you. But I agree with Commissioner Dantler. I mean, you could say community meetings about proposed electric rate increases, just to put it right in the headline and get more people to come. Our objective is to get more people to come. The more the better, to be part of the discussion so that it informs your opinions. So I think, for whatever you want to take into consideration for anything that's not printed already or advertising that you're considering submitting something to consider.
Well, and that, Mr. President, is certainly our objective, and we weren't trying to hide anything.
I'm not saying that it was done intentionally. Just a comment and an observation that I think it's worth considering.
We'll go back, especially on the websites and anything we're doing on GTV6, and make the splash, make it a little splashier, at least in regards to getting that initial point across that it is rate increases we're dealing with.
Is there, in terms of the advertising, did you guys consider any online advertising? Because several of these, at least a couple of the publications that I see on here have a pretty good online presence as well, so that would help in getting the word out.
Yes, wherever possible, if it's the CB Weekly or any of the newspapers that we advertise with, if it's in their paper on a particular date, it's also on their website.
Great, thank you. And so, are these dates set now, the 4 dates?
Yes.
Okay. So they're July 11th, 2 of them, one at lunch at noon, one at 7 p.m., and then Monday the 16th, 7 to 8:30, and and Wednesday, July 18th, 7 to 8:30.
Correct.
And if we on the commission wanted to hear the proposals and recommendations and analysis of staff, any of us could pop into any of the meetings.
I don't see any reason why not.
That's correct. We wouldn't want all 5 of you there at the same meeting, but I'm sure that can be arranged with all.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
2 at a time.
Buddy system.
Okay, so if any commissioners intend on going, I know Commissioner Yao, you do want to go to all of them. I know you. But if anyone does, all joking aside, if you could please let George Agabegians know so that he can coordinate the 2 at a time rule. Any other questions on this issue? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr. Powers. We do have a speaker on this issue, Mr. Herbert Milano.
Thank you, Commission President Armenian, members of the Commission and staff. My name is Herbert Milano. Ms. Dentler, thank you very much for pointing out the manner in which this particular community meeting announcement is being created. As I was looking at it, I thought, I could give it to my son and he'll come back and give you he's a graphic artist, and I can guarantee it will be something significantly different than what is here. We have several problems. Doing business as we usually do, or trying to change the way we face our problems. And it's amazing how much design goes into that. The reason why Apple is so successful is because they truly, really work at the design of what they're presenting and look deeply as to how that customer is going to interface with you. And that's what's missing. And this is an example of that. Because it's a monopoly. Whether we agree or don't agree, the council is going to be moved forward and basically rubber stamp whatever. Look, if you don't give the staff direction that I think that you would imagine would be firm, say, look, unless 1% of the population is directly responsive to this thing, we don't consider it a success. 1%. How's that as a number? Because it's going to impact absolutely everybody, and everybody's budget, and individuals who are hard-pressed, to even hold on a job or not even afford health care, or when they need the electricity for their own, essential human needs. What do you say? Why not say that? Why not say, look, I want 1%. How about a more stringent 1% by zip code to make sure that your 1% doesn't include just everybody over the 134 freeway? Look, we have language problems to be able to do the proper outreach. How about addressing it to, let's say, the apartment owners and managers? There are approximately 8 units for every single owner or every single apartment, or about 16 units for every single owner in Glendale. How about approaching those managers and say, look, this is important for you and the rest of your tenants. Make sure that you invite them. Here's the information. Here's a map of how to get there. Here's additional phone numbers that you can call, and actually out there drive that marketing. But you don't have people with experience in marketing. Not really. I mean, it's one thing to get a public administration master's. Another thing is really doing out there and working with the public where you're accountable to say, if you don't get X number of people in here, I don't consider that a success. And I think that's the mindset that needs to be changed. And I hope that you demand that there be some very specific outcomes of participation, or a point where you don't consider it a success. Thank you very much.
I have a comment. I don't agree with Mr. Milano very often. No offense to Mr. Milano, but there are times I agree with things he says to us, and a lot of times I disagree. And reasonable minds can differ on various topics. On this, I 100% agree with his comment. I think that our staff does a great job of preparing PowerPoints, visual materials that are really helpful to our commission. We've got good marketing people. We've got all kinds of charts and graphs that are really helpful to me as a commissioner. And I think that this flyer is really subpar. And I think that, unfortunately, it could potentially have an unintended consequence of serving to bring ridicule on the utility. And I don't want to be associated with it because I think it's that subpar. I think that it's open to criticism on a number of levels, but chief among them is that it looks like we have something to hide and that we don't want to talk to our community. And so and that's my comment.
I'll just add one thing. I do agree with Mr. Milano in that the business model for the utility is changing. It has to be a much more customer-centric business model. We have to beef up all our fronts that deal with the customer and become more effective and visible and engage in the two-way dialogue with our customers, because that is what that's really the premise of the whole smart grid. One of the important premises of the smart grid investment that we've made is changing that model from a one-way to a two-way model. But I will say that, in defense of staff a little bit, I've personally had meetings with multiple departments, including with Mr. Zern, to express the importance that I see about that new era we need to shift into as a utility. And it's not just Glendale Water and Power, it's all utilities are struggling with the same shift in business model. So I think staff is well-intentioned. I think in some places we're under-resourced, particularly in the area of public outreach and communication that has traditionally been kind of a secondary function. It needs to be a primary function. I've met with Tammy Valier to discuss kind of where the future of the customer service operation needs to go beyond just taking calls about bills. It needs to be about customer engagement, and that too is an area that is in need of investment. So I do see openness from staff and agreement on those fronts. It's just going to take a little bit of time to not only make the appropriate investments, but also shift the culture, management culture of the utility, be a little bit different than where it was in the past. Again, not because the past was wrong, it's just that we were in a different time and we're entering a different era now. And I have seen, agreement that, with philosophically at least that's where we have to go. So I do appreciate all the comments. I do believe that staff will take them into account in terms of doing, improving upon it. I think our feedback is very important on these things, not only at a commission level, but also on an individual level. Any sort of guidance we can provide to staff is of help, and that also includes from the public. If the public has ideas on these things, they ought to, be communicating with the staff to help, including at these forums, if there's a way to improve the customer engagement model on these issues. I think especially in these times when we're dealing with rate increases and asking the public for more, it's incumbent upon all of us in this process to communicate more frequently, more effectively with all the different constituencies throughout the city to engage them in this discussion, because at the end of the day they're going to be asked to pay the bills that support these projects. So we need their support ultimately, and their agreement on these things to keep moving the ball forward. Any other? Okay. Well, with that, we'll move on to the next item.
Item 6, new business agenda forecast.
So you'll see that an idea that was proposed by Mr. Zern and staff was we were trying to get all commissioners present for a special meeting in July to discuss the rate increase, but we were having conflicts where a few commissioners were not able to attend. We were able to get the quorum of 3, but we weren't able to get everyone. And I agreed with Mr. Zern's request that all commissioners be present for this important discussion. So the recommendation that we came up with was to actually change the agenda for the August 6th regular meeting to be purely dedicated to electric rates, and then they would come to us kind of post all the public meetings that they will have had by then, and we'll dedicate the entire meeting to that. Question for council, is that then considered a special meeting, or is just that it's a one-item agenda meeting?
One-item agenda meeting.
So it's a regular meeting with one agenda item only, and that's electric rate presentation.
Correct.
Okay.
No meeting on July 19th?
Correct. That, under this scenario, that's what it would be.
Okay.
Is everyone in agreement with that approach?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so what was done is what agenda items we did have were redistributed amongst other months. Is that correct, Mr. Zern? That's the way it was done. So everything that we were going to talk about in August is still represented here. It's just that it was moved around. So in terms of agenda forecast, we don't have to do it at this meeting, but it would be good to at least look one more month ahead, at least look at the September agenda. So that would be the 90-day assessment, which is what we talked about at the last commission meeting. Mr. Zern and Mr. Ochoa would come back to kind of discuss their findings. I think that's very important. Smart grid update, as we talked about, when Mr. Cunin presented today, I would like to propose, I think that remains on the agenda, but I would like to propose to staff that be focused on those 4 items that were not receiving funding because of the $10 million cut. So if it could be a deeper dive into that specific area as opposed to just a general update.
Can do that.
That would make that more valuable.
And as to that, Mr. President, I see that we're meeting in with a very short break between September 24th. It'll be a really short time till our next meeting of October 1st, and we have smart grid update on both. So,
yeah, we might, and I imagine the 90-day assessment's going to take some time to dig out. We'd want to spend some quality time on that.
I agree.
So maybe we delete the item from the September 24th meeting for smart grid update and just have my same comments apply to the October one. Is that fair? We have concurrence to delete the update one? Okay. So that relieves that a little bit. And could council clarify for me, we just had a NERC WEC compliance program update. Is there more to be discussed in September?
I think we had that on quarterly. Is that correct, Ramon? Yes, we had it on quarterly, and I guess for some reason it's showing up again in September. So maybe we can defer that one.
So can we defer that to the October one? Okay. So if everyone agrees with that, we'll move WEC to October.
When will we know if we have the one-year extension on the from the DOE on the smart grid?
We'll find. No, Mr. Keenan left the
that's
chambers,
okay.
and
Okay.
he would be the one most knowledgeable on that. So we can certainly find out and get that back to you. Ms. Dentler is if I could take the liberty of would you, if there's any change in that, would you like us to bring at least an update to you at the September meeting so we don't?
Well, yeah, or if it's appropriate, you could just tell us all by email. I mean,
No problem. That's what I'll do.
something we have to worry about, we'll worry about
Correct.
it. If it's pretty routine, then just shoot us an email and say it's a non-issue,
That's what we'll do.
if everyone's okay with that.
Okay, so smart grid moves over, NERC WEC moves to October. So that would leave water department update, underground districts, which is an agenda item that Commissioner Chan had requested earlier that we had postponed.
It's not all that important. If you want to free it up a little bit more, we can postpone that too. So it's up to you.
No, let's keep that because I think we already postponed it once. Water update. Now, we just got a water update today. Again, is that part of the quarterly update? Okay. On there then.
Mr. Kavunas had a good suggestion that maybe one of our water updates be focused on recycled water.
So maybe we can make that one on recycled water.
Yes, Mr. President, we can do that. I have that down as well.
Okay. And then customer service, that's a quarterly as well, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Have that as well.
Then my only other comment would be when you're considering the order of these, I'd want to front load it with the 90-day assessment so that we have enough time to deal with that. And if need be, if we run out of time, we can always defer one of these items. Any other agenda items that anyone wants to add or wants to deal with? That at least takes us through, and the reason we have September on the 24th is because of the Labor Day.
Correct.
Did you guys postpone the plane accident? Where is that one?
We did,
That was on the last agenda, right?
yeah. So maybe we can add that to the, didn't we have that on the last agenda? Okay.
We did.
So maybe we can add that to the October.
Okay.
Presumably that presentation's already prepared, and
Yes.
has the timeline been changed for a presentation to council of a potential bond and rating?
No.
So the date for that remains an October date?
It's actually a mid-August, so it's shortly after the commission meeting. We had originally tried, what our goal was to get it within the last second to third week of August, and as things turned out, we were able to get as President Armenian indicated, we were able to work the commission meeting in before that, so we were able to keep the schedule for council. Our hope is to have a decision by the end of August.
Well, then procedurally, could you inform us now, if it's appropriate and possible, whether staff will be asking us to consider adopting a recommendation to send to council on 8/6/12 rather than just like passively listening?
That was my hope, is that the commission will be providing a recommendation, as then we would prepare that almost immediately to get back to council, probably within 2 weeks from the commission meeting.
And bond-related topics will be in that same presentation?
Ms. Dentler, the way that the presentation will focus on the recommendation for the rate increase, but however, inherent in that rate increase is the bonds, and we are making the assumption that the bond will be issued. I keep saying bonds because we have the water bond, but that's not part of this. When we go to council, it'll be strictly the rate increase as well. The bonds, if the rate increases is approved, we would then come back to council sometime probably late September, early October, with a separate item to discuss the bonds.
Okay, thanks.
Just one more comment. For the smart grid update on October 1st, besides diving deep into the items that were cut from the budget, can we get a real detailed analysis of the trade-offs? For example, what was the potential revenue or the return on investment for those items? And one item also, I don't know if it was cut or not, but the specific question I had about the certain automated reports that would generate certain client emails and incentivize, again, consumers to reduce rates and allow us as GWP to cut our costs in the rates that we purchase power at.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you can get a deeper analysis on that, that would be great.
We'll do that.
Okay. Any other agenda items? That satisfy your questions? Okay.
So are we all committed to be here on August 6th?
Day of the week, is it? Should be. I believe it's a Monday. It's a regular meeting.
Monday.
So it would be, we would meet that Monday and potentially make a recommendation to council that then would go on to council's agenda, like an ordinance adoption on the following night, and then be voted on the following Tuesday?
No, Ms. Dentler, we would probably get it back to council at a minimum within a week, not the next night, but a week from that next Tuesday. More likely it would be 2 weeks from then. We'd get try to get it done by the end of the 31st. It goes on, we would have a rate increase by the end of September.
Well, I would suggest, especially if we're going to have substantial public comment, which I think that we might want to plan for. It may be a lengthy meeting, so if we're also going to be debating and discussing potential motion language on top of extensive staff presentation followed by potentially extensive public comment. It could be a long meeting, and maybe we need to commit to the 3 to 4 hour range and not. And hopefully we won't be told we only have the meeting room for 2 hours. Or we really want to be able to hear from people.
Can we start the meeting earlier?
We could, Mr. President, members of the commission. Let me check on that. Let me see if we have any limitations on how long we can go, and then also look at the potential to start maybe an hour earlier. And
Would commissioners prefer starting earlier or going later?
I prefer keeping it the same at 4, and then I think because of our regular scheduled meeting, we can go beyond that, because that's my understanding when I was deciding.
So you
I
prefer
agree
to
with that.
start
I'm just
at 4?
trying to learn from what happened with water, and let's plan ahead so that we understand what a long agenda that might be. But I would also prefer to stick to 4 o'clock, and the public is used to that.
Okay, we'll stick to that. I think we should also, I mean, my preference is not to have to limit public comment, particularly on this topic, so for that reason, too, I'd like to give enough time to run over. So I think plan on a 4 to 7 p.m. meeting, and you know, depending on response.
Staff will be providing a takeout dinner. We'll have a dinner break.
Absolutely. Pizza. Okay, if there's no others, can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Meeting's adjourned.